Hello and welcome to the International Photography Hall of Fame and Museum Legends of Photography event with 2019 inductee Steve McCurry. IPHF board member and photography enthusiast Jim Cooper will be introducing Mr. McCurry for today's event. Thank you, Jim, and thank you, Steve.
Thank you.
Thank you, Eva. So let me start by saying I'm home, and as you can see behind me, I'm a big Steve McCurry fan. We have numerous photographs gracing our walls, and I pulled two of them to show and tell. You'll see them in the slideshow. I also want to add in, Steve, without embarrassing you in the least, I'm also just a big fan of Steve McCurry, the person. He's just an approachable, humble, great person who has time for everyone, and I'm just a fan of his work and a fan of who he is. And I've really been happy to get to know you over the years and have you to our home to speak to our friends. So tonight will be interesting. You're gonna hear from one of the best. Steve has scores of magazine and book covers, over a dozen books. I can't tell you how many we have in our house, countless exhibitions from around the world. Steve studied film at Penn State before working at a local newspaper. And then after several years of freelance work, he left for India and Pakistan, where I think this all really started for him. Eventually meeting a group of Afghan refugees who smuggled him across the border into Afghanistan, just as Russia was invading, closing the country. Steve might talk about it, but I seem to recall you smuggled canisters of film in your turban or something to get them in and out of the country. He brought the world the first images of the conflict, though, including his celebrated image of the Afghan girl, Sarbat Gula. Since then, Steve has gone on to create images over 6 continents, countless countries. His work spans conflicts, vanishing cultures, ancient traditions, contemporary culture. And you're going to hear and see a lot about that this evening. And we're very, very excited that he's taken the time to share all that work with the people on this call. There will be time for Q&A, so please type in your questions, and Eva will assemble them, and we'll have some time, and we'll get some of your own questions in. But why don't we start? I'm going to be asking Steve some questions. We hope that you all participate as well. What's your first memory of photography, and did that influence you to pursue photography for a lifetime career?
I think my first recollection was actually my father, who was a kind of an avid photographer. He had an old Argus camera, and we used to go out on vacations, and he would photograph. And my uncle actually had a dark room in his closet. So that was, yeah. Of course, when I was went to camp, I had a Brownie, like a kind of an Instamatic type of camera. And then I'd sort of kind of lost touch with it. I got interested in art and drawing. It wasn't until I was 19 and I went to Europe, and just by chance, I lived with a family who the father and the son were avid photographers. And it was my first time when I would just go out on the street and wander around Stockholm and photograph just whatever we saw, whatever interested us, and we come back and we develop it and print it. That was really the first time when I was really kind of falling in love with just the kind of wandering and exploring and having a curiosity about different places and people. And I guess that I found myself back in college, looking for some direction in my life. I thought, not really knowing what I wanted to do, I thought, well, I love movies, I love filmmaking. But in that program, while I was studying cinematography, I had a requirement to take a class in still photography. And that was like an epiphany. Suddenly I had a camera, I had 35 millimeter film, one lens, I had a 50 millimeter lens, and I just couldn't get enough of just walking around the town and the campus and photographing my people and the neighbors and friends. I guess it was at that point I decided that this is exactly what I want to do for the rest of my life. You know, whatever I do, wherever I go, I want photography to be kind of central to that. And, you know, after having traveled as a tourist in Europe and Africa, and I thought, you know, I'm going to go, I'm going to take all my money and take all the risk. I'm just going to jump in with both feet and go live in India for like 2 years. I had no assignments. It was really just a chance, but I didn't really, at that point, there was no alternative. So I just went and I spent 2 years kind of learning about the culture, finding stories which I thought would be great photo essays, gathered my pictures. But at my big break came at the end of those 2 years when I just by chance went into Afghanistan with some fighters, the Mujahideen, who invited me to go in to document what was happening. And that really changed my life because I went in, photographed it, went back again a month later, spent a month. And so when this became an international news story in December 1979, I had all these pictures, all these contacts, and I was sending my pictures back. I got a distribution through an agency which no longer exists called Gamma Liaison. And through that distribution, my pictures ended up being published in all the major magazines in the world. And you know, it was just by chance. The whole thing was just kind of a fluke. But I just took that ball and I ran with it, and kind of one thing led to the next, and you know, here I am. I have to say there was one thing which was really pivotal in I think my photography development. When I was 12, I remember going through a stack of old Life magazines at my grandmother's house. And one of the stories was by a New Zealand photographer named Brian Brake. Brian photographed the monsoon like in 1960. And this was an epic story. It was just the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen. So I was poring over this story when I was 12 years old, just mesmerized. It was just this magical set of pictures. And I right then I thought, you know, whatever I do in my life, I want to go and see that for myself. I want to go and experience the monsoon. There was so much drama and life. So that's kind of what, in a way, you know, encouraged me to go to India as sort of kicking off my freelance career. And
so Steve, you went over to India. You had money that you'd saved, but you didn't really have a job. You didn't really have an assignment. You just took your chances.
I was living off of savings.
Yeah.
There was an occasional picture I could sell to a magazine through my sister, who was helping me along the way. But it was, you know, it was only after those 2 years of basically no income, no guarantee. I was buying film in the market, in the bazaar. Sometimes it was expired film. And I just, that trip into Afghanistan was really pivotal. And in a way, once I had my pictures out there, I guess people started seeing my name, and I started at that point getting assignments, primarily to go back to Afghanistan. That was what I was being hired to do initially. So I went into Afghanistan like 20 times, in and out. And that's kind of basically, you know, and till now I've been there maybe 30 times. I'm a true believer in finding something that you care deeply about. something you're passionate about, a story that you love, and then just honing in and going back over and over. I really feel like if you dig deep and go back to a place multiple times, that you get into different levels and things start to emerge. It's almost mystical in your approach. And whereas when you first arrived at a place, you're not really seeing things, but after some time, multiple trips, you start experiencing it in a much deeper way. So I think that's something which is kind of really important in your developing your work.
So we actually just a few minutes ago flashed up the Afghan girl photograph, which you're very, very famous for. Maybe we should spend a second on that. Which trip was that? Early in your time there?
Well, that was in 1984. I'd already spent 5 years in the region. That's a long time, 5 years. And
yeah,
I photographed her. It was this picture still continuing to?
I think Steven's trying to push that one up. There we go.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it was just one of those magic moments when you see something and all the elements came together. And the light was right. The background was right. It was just a situation where I didn't have to really do anything other than try and get the picture in focus. But I knew as soon as I saw her that she had this very special look. To kind of fast forward to today, through the last 20 years, particularly in the last sort of year and a half, when the Taliban started kind of marching into Kabul, she told us that she wanted to get out of the country because she was a bit worried for her safety and the safety of her family. And so we facilitated her leaving, and now she's living in Italy.
Oh, really?
The family. So it was actually a wonderful, it was to be able to help her and to do something for her and her family and provide education for her kids has been very, very gratifying.
But Steve, you don't have to elaborate much on this, but my understanding is you've helped her several times along the way. Didn't you help her relocate once to, I think, Pakistan, and now you've relocated her to Italy?
Yeah, we helped get her a home in Pakistan through some. There was a lot of intrigue in the country, and she was arrested for the charge, which was never really proven, that she had false papers, and put in jail actually for some days. And it became this international news story, and the Pakistanis finally realized that this was really not a good look for them, to put a refugee, a woman who's been widowed, her daughter had died of diabetes, and she was just trying to provide for her family. So there was this kind of outrage around the world, and so they kind of let her go, and then she went back to Afghanistan, where the president at the time presented her with a house and said, you're our honored, citizen, and you've done so much. Your picture has helped so many people and inspired so many people, and you had such great dignity. And but then when the Taliban came into the scene, everything sort of changed. So here we are. So
Steve, you're in a lot of, I'll say, dangerous situations, quite honestly, with your camera. How do you maintain composure? How do you sort of know that you're in a dangerous position, and yet you're trying to film all this, you're trying to take pictures of all this?
Well, you know, it takes a certain kind of person, a certain kind of, I guess, DNA that you know, everybody's built differently, and I think some people want to witness certain stories and see certain situations, and to see them for themselves. To go to a place like Afghanistan, or you know, Yemen, or Bosnia, or someplace, and to try and tell that story with the hopes that people will become informed, perhaps help to influence policy or donate money or whatever. And I think it's an effort to try and show the truth about what's happening in our world, whether it's political or environmental or whatever, because you know, you have to take a stand at some point. And you know, I think it's important to be counted and try and help some of these people in these situations.
But are you in what I would call fearful situations? Like you're saying, this is getting very dicey. I know I need to take a picture, but I also got to get home.
Well, sometimes things, once you're already in that mindset, in that zone of danger, I think sometimes it becomes sort of normal, or sometimes you feel a little bit impervious to the danger, or you know how to deal with it. You become you know, understand how to navigate. So I think that's part of the way I kind of the way I kind of reacted to those. But I mean, you never want to die for a picture. And but on the other hand, you know, that's what you're there for, is to tell that story and to try and work within a margin of safety.
Steve, as we're looking at these photographs, although this is not one I'm thinking of, but there's a lot of people who look right at you. They know you're taking their picture. What is your approach? Do you seek their permission? Do you try to sneak in a shot? What is your approach to that?
Well, I always want permission. I mean, there's different kinds of way of working. There's sort of street photography where you want to observe and be unobtrusive and photograph human behavior as it unfolds, such as this picture. I'm not going to wave and say, "Hey, look at me. I want to take your," you know, get permission. I think you have to use your own judgment. I think you have to, you know, what's right, what's wrong, what's being respectful, and you know, how would I feel if I was, you know, being photographed? But if it's a portrait, I always make sure I have permission from the person to make their portrait. So, you know, the way I work, I have to get their cooperation. I want to be able them to look into my lens, and I want to look into their eyes, and so it's this sort of collaboration. So I never sort of take a picture without getting permission.
But you got language issues a lot of times, correct?
Well, I think that, yeah, I work with a translator. I work with
oh, you do?
a fixer. I would say almost all the time. And but even without a translator, you can still sense through body language how a person is reacting to the camera. I mean, that's pretty. If people want to be, if people will agree to be photographed, there's all sorts of body language and expressions, and you know, if people don't want to be photographed, they'll let you know that too. So it's pretty easy to figure out. And if people don't want to be photographed, that's perfectly fine. I never impose myself on anybody.
So for those of us who would love to take some of the photographs like you, or any advice on how we get these total strangers in a foreign land to cooperate?
It's very simple. You just have to have a little bit of courage and walk up to people and smile and be respectful. And, you know, 9 times out of 10, people will agree and you know, there's no real device or secret or way of doing it. You just have to be kind of go up and just put yourself out there and be ready for maybe rejection or so. But people are usually pretty, you know, if they don't want to be photographed, they'll say so, and if they agree, then that's fine. But there's no secret or there's no formula to just be like a good person and go up and get permission. It's not any more
Steve,
complicated than that.
let me ask you about composition. Like we just saw a photograph that looks like you position yourself as a railroad yard. Looks like you positioned yourself somewhere high up to take that photograph.
I was on a bridge in this
Okay.
picture. I was on a walkway, sort of a bridge that went from one side of the station to the other side. And I went up there probably 2 or 3 times, different nights, because the sky was really spectacular. And this was a fairly important railway juncture. So there were a lot of trains coming and going every, I don't know, 20 minutes.
So did you just wait it out? Did you just,
Well, I liked, it was a question of just knowing the timings of the train. So I had a timetable.
okay.
I had the timetable and I knew when they were coming, so I could be ready. And I knew that it was coming at a certain time, so I would wait. I mean, sometimes it was late, sometimes it didn't come at all. But as I was exploring this particular station, it's in Agra. I just saw the composition of the track, this mosque in the background, the architecture, and it just seemed to pack a lot of interesting stuff into one frame. But it required several attempts, meaning I went back, there's like 3 times, different occasions. And the train would come later, come earlier, the light was different, but I just kept persisting.
So you knew there was a shot in there and you were going to get it.
Yeah, I knew that there was a potential of a picture. I knew if I waited, was patient, it's kind of a sense of pre-visualizing the scene and seeing the elements and how they could work together.
Big picture, what are some of the influences that you've had in your career, other photographers that you've admired, you've emulated, you've studied, you know, any of those?
Well, I think, for me, Henri Cartier-Bresson, who was this kind of a genius with the camera, who photographed in the sort of the 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s. He was one of the founders of Magnum Photos, and that sort of his work kind of inspired me to want to join Magnum. And later on, I ended up being kind of friends with Henri and his wife, Martine. I would say Henri Kertész, a Hungarian photographer. We lived in the same apartment building in New York. And again, just one of the great photographers. But also, I looked a lot of, Dorothea Lange, Margaret Burke-White. There's some very, Diane Arbus, a lot of very gifted women photographers. And, the photographers from Russia and China. So I was really interested mostly in sort of the street photography, but also the work of Eugene Smith, I thought was at the time was really extraordinary. Walker Evans for different reasons. Of course, Weston and Paul Strand. Most of the photographers I was looking at, August Sander, of course, the German photographer. They were all black and white. There was only, I would say, there was Saul Leiter, but there was Ernst Haas, who again was a Magnum photographer, and did this seminal book called, what was it called? Creation, back in the 60s. Just an amazing body of work. But most of the photographers that I really looked to were black and white. As I began to photograph and travel, it just seemed to me that color, it was more sort of authentic to the world we live in. It was, since the world's in color, so much of the story of culture and people and was color. You know, you go into a Tibetan monastery or a Hindu temple, and color has such an integral part of the story. So I decided to photograph in color for primarily that reason.
So when we were at the induction ceremony, I got to overhear you and Paul Nicklin talking about the trials and tribulations of shooting for Nat Geo. Maybe you could tell how you got started with them and what you've done with them, and how that evolved.
Well, back in the late 70s, early 80s, when I sort of started, magazines were like the main place. I mean, there were lots of magazines, big budgets, send you off on assignment sometimes for weeks or months. The big magazine, which, that was really the one that everybody really looked to was Life magazine. They covered the movies, they covered war, they covered daily life. There were a lot of hard-hitting pictures. So, they had this big staff of photographers. The one thing I liked about Life was that they really covered the whole world. But I mean, they photographed war and the politics, whereas Nat Geo kind of stayed away from that. In World War II, Life had a lot of Eugene Smith and George Silk. There were a lot of some of the great Life photographers went to Europe. Bob Capa, worked in France and Italy, perhaps the greatest war photographer of all time. And they had photographers in Asia, Japan, and in the South Pacific. So now, though, the situation is that although I spent probably 25 years photographing, for the major magazines, today it's extremely difficult to make a living from magazine assignments, and they're so few and far between that for me now, I prefer to kind of self-assign myself to go places, to go exactly where I want to go, and spend how much time I think I need there, and decide when I've had enough, if I want to leave, photograph exactly what interests me without having to worry about an editor or a deadline or a shopping list of different facets of this or that. So that's kind of where I'm at now. I like working on books and exhibitions, and going places and photographing in my own way.
Are you still publishing in magazines, or are you just mainly creating your own portfolio now?
My sort of way of working is assign myself. If I do an assignment for commercial work or advertising, then I consider that just a way to sort of pay my bills. And Some of that work is wonderful. I've had incredible assignments from the sort of the commercial world, but for me, if there's a place that I want to go to and make pictures for a book or an exhibition, I'll just go on my own.
What are some of the places right now? What would be the next place you want to go to?
Well, I'd like to go back to Afghanistan, Ukraine, Yemen, Cuba. Always want to go back to India. I've spent most of my career in Asia, in Southeast Asia, South Asia. Tibet, of course, is China now is a little bit difficult with COVID and things. So that Tibet's a little bit tricky of a place to go to. But I mean, there are a few places that I've mentioned that I'd like to go back to sometime in the near future.
So the first three places you mentioned, Afghanistan, Ukraine, Yemen, are you going in looking for color, or are you going in looking for action? Because it seems like all three of those.
No, I'm not looking
things.
for. I'm looking for the, what's happening to people.
Okay.
How are their lives? What's being done? What are they doing? What conditions are they living in? It's more about the human stories there, not really. I don't want to go to the front line. That's not kind of what I've done in my. I mean, I've been there at times in my life, but that's not really kind of what I'm about.
So the pictures we're looking at right now, probably three before and this one as well, are all sort of flooded scenes.
Yeah,
Does
that
it
was
ever
that
cross your
story that's inspired
okay.
by Brian Brake. This is what he did his story, and I kind of reinvented the idea and did it in my own way. I mean, I'm sure there's another photographer that's going to go back, and do it in his or her own way, and God bless. I mean, it's a dramatic story. It's a story about survival. If there's too much rain, there's flooding, and if there's not enough rain, there's drought. Farmers depend on the rain, and if it doesn't rain, that's their livelihood. That's how they feed themselves. So, I spent 6 months traveling around the sort of the monsoon world, primarily India, Nepal, Indonesia, Thailand, Sri Lanka, Bangladesh. I mean, all these countries that's sort of where the monsoon really renews life. And this poor guy lost his whole his tailor shop in the flood. And
but look at him smiling
on the street. People were yelling to him, "Oh, the photographer's going to take your picture. Smile." And so out of self-consciousness, the guy started to smile, even though his shop had been devastated.
So when something like what just happened in Florida with Ian, do you ever contemplate grabbing your camera and going down there and taking this with the human condition of that event right now in the United States?
Yeah, I went down to Katrina, whenever that was, more than 10 years ago, I guess.
Yeah.
But I'm kind of at a different place in my life now. And I'm interested in certain things. I'm not really that positioned to kind of drop everything and sort of dash off. I think in life you want to, you grow, you evolve, you reinvent yourself. You only live once, and I think you want to have as full of it as an experience as you can. And I mean, it does interest me. I think it's important to photograph, show that. I mean, how else do people get our information except for, photographers and writers and cameramen and people to go down and tell that. So that's how we sort of get our information. But I've kind of moved on a little bit from that kind of work.
So are there any places you haven't been that are on your list still to
Well,
photograph?
I'd like to go to, I'd like to go to some places in Eastern Europe. I mentioned Ukraine, but also Romania and Bulgaria and Albania. So there's some places that I haven't been to, but there's a lot of places I want to go back to. This is in Nepal, for instance. I always, I had so many great, memories of Nepal. It's basically part of it's a Buddhist culture, part of it's Hindu culture, and such sweet people. And I've always loved mountains. And there's no country in the world that has more mountains than Nepal. So I spent a lot of time trekking in the Himalayas, and it was just amazing. So I would love to go back and just wander around. It's so the air is clean, it's quiet. It's just gonna sit there and kind of contemplate, life. I love this picture of this boy with this cow. I don't know. I was wandering by and I saw it, made a couple pictures. I don't know much about how this happened or who the boy was. But this was in Durbar Square in Kathmandu. And I just thought this relationship, whatever it was, it looked so special, and some kind of connection between this cow and this boy.
So if you had to choose tomorrow, go back to a place you love or go to someplace new?
I would go back to Tibet.
Okay.
I would go back to Tibet. That would be my first stop. Again, there's a combination of the culture and the landscape, but there's something about a culture that culture which Buddhism is so central to, and just to kind of wander and explore. I mean, some of my favorite memories in life have been in just being in these villages in Tibet. And I kind of, it's a little, there's been so much migration into Tibet from other parts of China that it's kind of, spoiled the place a bit, but this is the world we live in, so nothing you can do about it.
Do you have any big projects that you've wrapped up or you've got underway or you're getting ready to pursue?
Yeah, I'm working on a couple books now. One is on sort of, I would say, spirituality. Of course, Buddhism is part of that. There's another book I'm kind of working on. So I try and have a kind of a book project a year. I've gotten into kind of that kind of a rhythm, and then I've been working on a series of exhibitions. I just opened one in Lisbon about 2 weeks ago, and about ready to have a couple in Italy, and then one in France in a month and a half. So I plan to go to. I'm doing a project with Leica in Dubai. So that's kind of a little bit about what I'm up to. And then over Christmas and New Year's, I'm doing a trip with my family. down to South America. So that's sort of some of the things I'm up to. And then next year, I'll do some of these personal projects. But yeah, life is full. I feel so blessed to be able to do what I do and go to places, hopefully make a difference with my work.
Steve, I'm gonna run out of time. We have some questions coming in. I have just a few more quick things. When did you switch to digital photography?
I switched from I was around in I think 2004. It was kind of a very abrupt. I was on a trip. I took a lot of film, but I also took a digital camera. And it was in that trip to Afghanistan that I started using digital. And so I started with film, and within about 6 weeks, I had completely switched over to digital. And for me, digital is so much, more kind of satisfying because I can shoot a much lower light. I often don't need a tripod. I don't, color balance isn't an issue. I can see what I'm doing immediately to judge a composition or light or a particular moment that I may have gotten or may not have gotten. So it's, and I used to carry like 300 rolls of film. I'd go someplace for, I don't know, a month or 2 or 3. I'd have like a whole suitcase full of film. And it was a nightmare going through customs. It was like, a nightmare. Of course, with a memory card, everything can fit right in your pocket. But I find the results, the quality, excellent. So I don't think to me, the quality is every bit as good as film, and there's so many advantages to digital.
Mm-hmm.
So I have no real nostalgia for film, and well, there's a lot of reasons why I think film it's for me the best choice.
I was flying back from Ireland last week, and I'm in line to go through security, and the college kid behind me had a little baggie filled with his film rolls, and he was going to hand them. They wasn't going to let him go through the X-ray. And I'm thinking back, I remember those days. He said he does both. He's a college student. He said he learns more from film than he does from digital, and I thought it was kind of interesting. Last question from me. I remember
one
talking.
More thing about digital. I think that in photography or in life, there's no rules about which camera, which was better. I mean, personally, I use a Leica, but there are a lot of other wonderful camera brands out there that are, they're great, and I don't think there's a right or wrong, black and white, color, Canon, Nikon. I mean, it just depends on your preference, and to me, it's just depends on how you want to, your art, how you want to express yourself, what gives you kind of fulfillment in your photography. So that, it doesn't matter.
So I'd always been told you must have prime lenses. You must have prime lenses. You're the first person who said no. Can you elaborate?
I mean, if you want to use a pinhole camera, God bless. There's people doing great work with a Holga, with a plastic camera, 8x10, 4x5, Hasselblad, phase. I mean, there's no, it just depends on what you want to do, chocolate or vanilla or whatever. It's, I don't think anybody should be, trying to convince somebody one way or the other to shoot in this way. I saw a whole wonderful book with a Holga, with a plastic camera. It's probably a $20 camera. Wonderful work. Probably better. That work was probably better than a lot of people using, a Hasselblad or whatever.
Interesting. I know we have some questions. Eva, you might be able to help us navigate through
happy to
them.
help. So Jerry here, the first question, he's asking, how do you get color in your how do you get the color in your pictures?
Well, I use Kodachrome in film for sort of 25 years, and I always underexposed my film by like a quarter of a stop, depending on the situation. And of course, when you underexpose, everything became more rich, more vibrant, more saturated. And to me, I liked that dark, moody, kind of saturated look. So it was more to do with underexposure than it was with, well, that was, just mostly just liking more kind of darkish, richer results from the film and from digital.
We have another question here from Jacob Buhovsky. He says, do you know if a photograph is going to work as you're taking it? What are the things you look for or identify that make you click the shutter?
Well, I think with experience, after some, through trial and error, after you've exposed, 50,000, 100,000, 200,000 exposures, you start to really see kind of what's working, what isn't working. And because you've been in those situations before, you've looked at all the great masters, and when you're confronted with a situation, you can go through your kind of mental computer and maybe remember how other photographers solved problems of light and composition. But I think you can kind of pre-visualize, the design of a picture or the background, and all this is sort of swirling around in your mind, so that when you're there looking, it's almost sort of like you're on automatic pilot. You're looking simultaneously at the foreground, the background, and it's all kind of, you can recognize what's happening in your frame, both foreground, background, shapes, areas of light and dark. And a lot of this comes from experience and trial and error. I mean, when you're young, you see something, oh, that's amazing, that's great. And you get home and you look at the film or whatever and think, well, wait a minute, that actually wasn't very, interesting after all. It's just a question of, I think, experience, practice.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. On that note, we have another question here from Allison Johnston, and she says, can you give some tips for elements to consider to compose a great photograph?
Well, I think, again, you asked that question to 100 photographers. I mean, for me, I think that, simplicity, looking at the picture and reducing, the certain angles and shapes. That's kind of, I think, very central to, for me, a good composition is, the lines and, the shapes, circles, triangles, squares, and how things relate, those shapes relate, and the light. And again, a lot of it's just trial and error, and photographing, working, looking at the results, asking yourself, if it didn't work, why didn't it work? If you look at another photographer, Eugene Smith or Andre Carter, what is it about their work that's so wonderful, so inspiring? How did they compose? How did they select what they did? I mean, and I think that once you start to study and learn and kind of integrate that into your work, you'll get better results. But again, it just takes a lot of kind of practice, discipline, consistency.
Right. Well, thank you. Michael Daft asks, when you go to foreign countries, particularly hostile ones like Afghanistan, do you need to be aware of laws governing photography in these countries, or do you bring your camera and shoot?
No, you have to be aware, man. You could get killed. I mean, literally, you could be killed if you don't understand the culture. I mean, I always travel with, I'm always on the street with a translator, an interpreter, kind of a fixer person who knows the culture. And if you're, say, in a country like Afghanistan, and you photograph, maybe even unwittingly photograph a woman on the street or in a village, I mean, you could literally be killed or beaten up or your camera broken, because that's just not culturally acceptable to photograph a woman. Even if somebody sees you and it's not their mother, sister, daughter, they'll just get in your face just based on the fact that you're disrespecting the culture in general. So you really have to know what's going on. And if you have a local person, they can explain to you, what you can do and what you can't do.
The local people, have you just built those relationships over the years, or can the average person find that helper?
I think it's a question of, you can find that person through your hotel or through a friend, or maybe there's a photographer that works for a newspaper, or a photographer who has a studio, or it's somebody that you trust. I mean, you have to know who I got robbed once because I trusted somebody. Turned out they weren't a photographer. That guy was a thief. So I lost my equipment. But I think if you can go to a country and, again, maybe it's the hotel you stay at, or maybe there's somebody you're a friend, or I don't know. There's different ways to find a good, reliable, honest sort of fixer assistant.
Right.
But you have to figure it out yourself. I mean, again, I remember going to a hotel in various countries and going to the manager and say, I need a guide. Can you recommend somebody? So, he's staking his reputation. He's giving you somebody he knows, he's, vouching for that person. So it's fairly easy in that regard.
Yeah. Well, thank you. I didn't know that, but that is good advice. And then for Jacob Bushowski asks, with the economics of photography having changed over the last 1 to 2 decades, what advice would you give a college student who wants to pursue travel / assignment / environmental or street photography as a profession?
Yeah, that's I mean, it's, if you really, have your mind set, then, go ahead and pursue it. It's tough. It's difficult. In some ways it's kind of impossible, but if you are driven and are, not going to take no for an answer, then you'll just, but it's a lot of work, and it's, there's no guarantees. Sometimes it takes years of practice and dedication, sacrifice, and you just have to decide, is that how I want to live my life? And I would say most people don't want to maybe put that much into it, and it's fine. There's no right or wrong. I mean, there's no kind of, you can do whatever you want to in your life, but if you want to embark on that journey, it's going to take a lot of, right? It's going to be like a lifestyle. It's going to probably consume your entire life. And if you're ready for that, it's not so much about talent, although that, of course, is a factor. It's mostly just about hard work.
Mm-hmm.
That's kind of what it boils down to. And do you have that commitment? And everybody's different.
Right. When you started your career, did you expect it to be everything that it was, the commitment that came with it?
Yeah, it was never a question for me. There was no turning back. There was never like, well, what am I going to do if this doesn't work? No, I mean, I was totally focused, totally committed, and there was no hesitation. I guess I was going to do that even if it killed me. I loved it. I was obsessed. That's all I wanted to do. And I was willing to work on any level. I mean, if it meant living in, $2 a night hotel rooms in India or whatever, I was ready to do that. And when I did it back then, I was having a ball, so I was prepared. Just my journey took a different sort of route, and so yeah.
Right. Yeah. Well, like you said, it takes a special kind of person. Not everyone could do that, but
But I mean, you can still photograph. You can still, photograph. You can still work. Maybe you're not doing it as a profession, but there's no reason why you literally can't photograph all the time for your own pleasure, for your own art, for your
right.
Satisfaction. So just because maybe you're not, making your kind of living out of photography, you can still photograph, even every day on the weekend or whatever.
Absolutely. We have one last question here from John Galbraith. So he's traveling in 20 days to India and Nepal, and he says, do you have any advice?
Oh yeah, I mean, this is a great part of the world, great people, very visual. I would, be careful with your equipment. I would be careful with, who you meet and how you operate. And I would try and go up to the north, up to Ladakh. Of course, it's going to be colder this time of year, but I would travel to the south. I would try and get a taste of different regions. This doesn't get any better than sort of India and Nepal. I mean, I spent months in Kathmandu, and I just was so wonderful. So I think Calcutta is a great city, probably my favorite city in South Asia. So Calcutta I would put at the top of my list, and of course Kathmandu, and Rajasthan is so much to offer in terms of history and landscape and wonderful people, very, very wonderful looks to them. So yeah, no, enjoy that part of the world. You'll have a great time.
Steve, we're about out of time. Do you have any final thoughts for your the group here that's been listening to you?
I just, you can get so much, photography is such a wonderful way to express yourself. It's a great way to tell stories. It's a great way to document the world that we live in. And it's a way to preserve memories. And I just can't think of a better way to have spent my life than with the camera. So I feel lucky to have had this journey.
Well, Steve, I want to thank you. It's been great for everyone on the call. I've really enjoyed watching the slideshow. I'm trying to ask questions, but I'm also very focused on what I'm seeing. So I've had to multitask here a little bit. It's been great help for IPHF. We're very, very proud to have you in the organization, and great for me to be able to catch up. You named some great spots where you have shows coming up, so I made a mental note of that. I'm going to follow up with you on that, see if I can see you at some of those shows. But anyway, obviously we all love your work. It's fabulous. It is so colorful. I mean, that was actually a simple but great question that came in earlier. Look at this picture right here. Thank you very, very much, and hope to see you soon.
Thanks, Jim. Thanks, Eva. Thanks, Stephen. It was a pleasure to spend time with you here.
Thank
Thanks
you
a
so
lot.
much. This has been wonderful.
Yep.
Have a good night, everyone.
Good night, everyone.
Jim.
Yep.
Thank you, Steve.
Thank you.